Billionaire pretends to listen to test Black Maid's kid and freezes. Seeing what she says, the chandeliers glittered across the ballroom as New York's wealthiest raised their glasses in celebration. In the center of it all stood William Anderson, the billionaire whose empire stretched from coast to coast. For him, this night was meant to be flawless, a display of power, status, and untouchable prestige. But the carefully crafted silence of admiration shattered in an instant. Angela Carter's little daughter, Sophie, wandered into the spotlight. Her dress was simple, her shoes slightly scuffed, and she looked completely out of place among the silk gowns and diamond necklaces. Yet what she did next froze the entire room. Instead of retreating under the weight of hundreds of disapproving eyes, Sophie reached for the microphone resting on the stage. Her voice, fragile but steady, cut through the hall. The words she spoke were not rehearsed, not polished, but they carried something money could never buy: truth. Gasps rippled across the audience. Billionaires who were used to controlling. Every narrative leaned forward, unsettled. And William Anderson, a man rarely caught off guard, felt his grip on the evening slip away. Sophie was not supposed to be here, not supposed to speak, and certainly not supposed to reveal what she was about to say. What came from that child's lips would not only change how everyone saw William Anderson, but would also alter the course of Angela Carter's life forever. Angela Miller's mornings always began before the sun even considered rising. She would tiptoe across the worn wooden floor of their tiny apartment, careful not to wake Sophie, her daughter, who still clutched a faded stuffed rabbit to her chest each night. The apartment was quiet, but not peaceful. It carried the constant hum of old radiators and the distant rumble of trucks outside. This was the life Angela had grown used to, modest, stretched thin, but held together by love. Her shift at Anderson Enterprises started early. While she was not an executive or a manager, her role as an administrative assistant demanded more than most people imagined. Angela handled schedules, coordinated meetings, and managed details for people who often pretended not to remember her name. The irony was sharp. Her entire day revolved around making the lives of millionaires smoother while she fought to keep food on her own table. Still, she did it all with quiet determination. Every payslip went first to rent, then groceries, then Sophie's school supplies. Only when those were handled did she think of herself, though most times there was nothing left to think about. She wore the same pair of scuffed black flats to work, and the same blazer she had purchased at a thrift store 2 years ago. No one at the office noticed, or maybe they did, and simply chose not to care. What they noticed, however, was Sophie. On days when Angela could not find a sitter, Sophie would sit in the corner of Angela's cubicle with crayons and coloring books, humming softly to herself. She was a bright-eyed child with an untamed curiosity, asking questions about everything and everyone. Some employees smiled politely at her presence, but many others whispered about how unprofessional it was. None was harsher than Gregory Barnes. Gregory, the vice president of operations, was the kind of man who relished power in the smallest of ways. He carried himself with the smug confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether the world was built in his favor. Gregory had grown, up wealthy, educated at private schools, and promoted more because of his last name than his achievements. He liked to remind everyone beneath him of their place, but with Angela, his disdain seemed sharper, almost personal. One afternoon, when Sophie's crayons rolled onto the conference room floor during a meeting, Gregory's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Is this a daycare now, Angela? Or do you think Anderson Enterprises should start providing babysitting services?" The executives chuckled, not because the remark was funny, but because laughing was safer than silence. Angela's cheeks burned as she hurried to gather the crayons. Sophie looked up, confused, her small hand clutching her mother's wrist. The sting of humiliation was not new to Angela, but it hurt differently when it unfolded in front of her daughter. She swallowed the lump in her throat, bowed her head, and muttered an apology she should never have needed to say. Gregory smirked, satisfied with the display of authority. For him, Angela was a reminder of everything he despised: struggle, humility, the refusal to bow down to wealth. He often muttered under his breath about people who do not belong in places like this. Angela knew what he meant. He never said it directly, but his tone dripped with a message clear as daylight. Women like her were supposed to serve, not stand beside power. Life outside of work was no kinder. Angela's neighborhood was a place where opportunity seemed to skip doorsteps. The grocery store had long aisles of cheap processed food, but little fresh produce. The playground swings squeaked with rust, and the local school faced constant budget cuts. Yet, Sophie thrived. She found joy in the smallest things: the glitter in her crayons, the shape of clouds, the melody of her mother's voice when Angela read bedtime stories. Angela often wondered how long she could shield Sophie from the cruel edges of the world. At night, she would watch her daughter sleep and whisper promises into the dark. "I will give you more, Sophie. I will not let them decide who you can become." Those promises weighed heavy, but they were also the fire that kept her moving each day. Meanwhile, William Anderson, the billionaire whose name adorned the company towers, lived in a reality so distant it might as well have been another universe. Angela had seen him only in passing, walking briskly through the lobby with tailored suits and security close behind. To him, employees like Angela were invisible, background noise in the symphony of his empire. The gulf between their lives could not have been wider. Angela's world was survival. William's was extravagance. Angela's nights ended with calculating which bills she could push to next month. William's ended with glasses of champagne at galas under chandeliers. And yet, unbeknownst to both, their worlds were set on a collision course, one that would shake the balance of power, dignity, and humanity in ways neither could have imagined. But before that collision, the injustice weighed heavier. Gregory did not stop at comments. He created obstacles, assigned impossible workloads, and found excuses to cut Angela out of opportunities for advancement. When she requested flexible hours to attend Sophie's school recital, Gregory refused, mocking her for prioritizing trivial family matters over serious corporate responsibility. Angela sat at her desk that evening, long after most had gone. Home. The office lights buzzed overhead, casting cold shadows across her paperwork. Sophie doodled quietly beside her, unaware of her mother's silent battle with exhaustion. In that moment, Angela felt the weight of being trapped, too valuable to let go, but too unimportant to be respected. The cruelty of it all was not only in Gregory's words or actions, but in how others allowed it to continue. No one defended her. No one stepped in. Angela carried her dignity like armor, but even armor begins to crack when struck too many times. She wondered how much longer she could endure, and whether Sophie would grow up believing that humiliation was normal, that silence was the price of survival. That thought frightened Angela most, because she had spent her life swallowing injustice. She could not bear the idea of Sophie doing the same. The week had been long, and Angela Miller felt it in her bones. She had worked extra hours at Anderson Enterprises just to keep up with the rent and groceries. That evening, she had no choice but to bring Sophie along to the office. The little girl sat quietly in the corner of Angela's desk with a sketchbook and crayons, her golden hair falling over her forehead as she drew colorful shapes. Angela prayed Sophie would stay unnoticed. The halls of Anderson Enterprises were no place for children, especially not for the daughter of a struggling secretary. Gregory Barnes had made that clear more than once. But Sophie, with her natural curiosity and innocent spirit, was not one to remain invisible for long. It happened when William Anderson himself walked past the row of offices. The building seemed to fall silent whenever he appeared. Tall, sharp, and dressed in a navy suit, William carried with him the weight of power. Most employees lowered their eyes, pretending to look busy as he passed. He rarely noticed them, but Sophie did not look away. Her little voice carried across the hall, clear and bright. "Why does everyone act scared when you walk by?" The entire floor froze. A dozen heads snapped toward her in shock. No one had ever spoken to William Anderson like that, especially not a child. Angela's face burned with panic. She rushed forward, whispering, "Sophie, please, say no more." But William stopped walking. Slowly he turned his gaze toward the small figure standing near Angela's desk. His blue eyes softened for the briefest moment, surprised by the courage of the child. "Scared?" William repeated, his voice calm yet curious. Sophie nodded, gripping her crayon tightly. "Yes. Everyone stops talking. No one smiles when you come around. It feels heavy." A murmur spread through the office like wildfire. Angela wanted to sink into the floor. Speaking to the CEO this way was dangerous. Gregory Barnes, standing at the end of the hallway, smirked with satisfaction. He saw an opportunity forming, one that could finally rid him of Angela Miller once and for all. William, however, did not raise his voice. Instead, he crouched down slightly so he was closer to Sophie's eye level. "And what about you? Do you feel scared of me?" Sophie tilted her head, her honesty unshaken. "No, you are just a man." "In a suit. My mommy works hard, and I think maybe you forget to smile too." The room fell into absolute silence. A child had spoken truth to the most powerful man in the company, and no one dared breathe. Angela's hands trembled as she pulled Sophie back. "I am so sorry, Mr. Anderson. She does not understand." But William raised a hand gently, stopping her apology. His eyes remained on Sophie, a strange spark of reflection flickering within them. "Perhaps she understands more than most," he said quietly. The employees exchanged stunned glances. William Anderson, who rarely offered more than a cold command, had listened to the words of a child. Angela's heart pounded with fear. She knew this moment could not end well. If Gregory decided to twist it, her job and their survival would be in danger. She whispered sternly to Sophie, "Please, darling, stay quiet." Sophie lowered her eyes, sensing her mother's worry. But William stood straighter, his attention sweeping across the room. For the first time he noticed the nervousness, the stiffness in the faces of his employees. He saw how quickly they avoided his gaze, how their fear hung heavier than respect. It unsettled him. As William walked away, his thoughts remained tangled with Sophie's simple words. He had spent his life building walls of authority, yet a small child had cracked them in seconds. From the corner, Gregory Barnes watched with narrowed eyes. His jaw tightened as he realized William's attention had been drawn to Angela's daughter. That spark of humanity could threaten everything Gregory had built for himself in the shadows of the company. "No," Gregory muttered under his breath. "I will not let this woman and her child climb where they do not belong." And so, while William's mind turned with questions he had never dared ask, Gregory's mind filled with schemes. Angela Miller would pay for this. He would make sure of it. The balance had shifted. A child's voice had pierced the silence of power, and nothing would ever be the same again. Gregory Barnes was a man who knew how to play games in the corporate world. He had power, he had influence, and most importantly, he had the confidence that no one dared to challenge him. But after Sophie's bold moment in William Anderson's office, Gregory saw something dangerous. Angela Miller was no longer invisible. She and her daughter had caught William's attention, and in Gregory's mind, that was unacceptable. The very next day, Angela walked into the sleek glass building of Anderson Enterprises with Sophie by her side. She held her daughter's hand tightly, whispering gentle encouragements. But her steps felt heavy, as if a storm was about to break over her head. She noticed the way people stared at her now, not with kindness, but with suspicion. Whispers floated around the office floor like smoke. Gregory had already started his work. Angela's first blow came quickly. She was called into human resources and told that several complaints had been filed against her. Missing files, late submissions, carelessness. Angela sat there stunned, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. She had never been late. She had never misplaced anything. Her work was always spotless. "This must be some mistake," she said softly, but the woman across the desk only looked at her with pity. "We are simply following procedure." Angela walked out of the office with her heart pounding. She knew who was behind this. Gregory. He was building a case against her, brick by brick, trying to make her look incompetent. That afternoon, Sophie waited quietly in the corner of her mother's office, sketching flowers in a small notebook. William happened to pass by. He paused when he saw the little girl's drawings. "Is that a sunflower?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Sophie looked up and nodded. "Yes. Sunflowers always face the light even when it is dark." For a moment William said nothing. That simple sentence, spoken with such innocence, struck him deeply. He glanced at Angela, who stood nervously, unsure if she should apologize for Sophie speaking again. But William only smiled faintly and continued walking. Angela's chest tightened. William had shown a spark of kindness, but Gregory's shadow was still stronger. That week, Gregory found new ways to humiliate Angela. He assigned her impossible deadlines, piled extra tasks on her desk, and made sly comments in front of her colleagues. He even suggested with a smirk that perhaps single mothers are not cut out for corporate life. Each word cut into Angela, but she kept going. She worked late nights, double-checked every report, and tried to shield Sophie from the hostility. But children see more than adults realize. Sophie would often look at her mother with wide, worried eyes. "Why are they so mean, Mama?" she asked one evening as they left the office. Angela bent down, brushing Sophie's hair gently. "Because some people fear what they do not understand, but we must keep our heads high." What Angela did not know was that someone else was watching her struggle. David Collins, a quiet man with sharp eyes, had recently been brought into Anderson Enterprises as a consultant. Most employees dismissed him as just another corporate advisor, but in truth, David had once worked with the FBI. He had seen corruption in many forms, and something about Gregory Barnes set his instincts on fire. From a distance, David observed Angela. He saw the way Gregory cornered her in meetings, the way colleagues were pressured into silence, and the way Angela kept her dignity even under attack. He also noticed Sophie's innocence, how the little girl's presence softened even William, who was known for his coldness. David began to dig quietly, looking into Gregory's dealings. He suspected there was more than just petty cruelty here. Numbers did not add up. Budgets seemed inflated. Reports were altered. Beneath the surface of luxury, Anderson Enterprises carried the stench of corruption. Meanwhile, Angela's world grew smaller each day. One evening, she stayed late to finish a stack of reports Gregory had accidentally dumped on her desk. As the office emptied, she heard Gregory's mocking voice behind her. "You know, Angela," he said, leaning against the doorway, "you should be careful. Mistakes have a way of destroying careers, and if you are not careful, even your daughter might suffer." Angela froze. It was no longer about her job. Gregory was threatening Sophie. She turned slowly, her eyes burning with a rare fire. "Not you dare bring my daughter into this," she said. Gregory only smiled. "Then do your work, and stay in your place." When he left, Angela sat at her desk, trembling, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at Sophie's drawing pinned to the side of her desk, a bright sunflower facing the sun. It gave her the strength to keep going. But the question lingered in the air like a storm cloud. How long could she withstand Gregory's cruelty? In the shadows, David Collins watched and waited, knowing the truth would soon come to light, and William Anderson, though silent, had already begun to see the cracks in his empire. The battle lines were being drawn. The night of the annual charity gala arrived, a glittering event where the company's most powerful leaders gathered to show wealth and influence. The grand ballroom sparkled with golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, and tall glass windows overlooking the city. Waiters carried trays of champagne, while photographers clicked away, capturing the laughter of the elite. Angela walked in, quietly, wearing a simple navy blue dress. She was not there to shine or be admired. She was there because Gregory Barnes insisted she attend. Deep inside, she knew it was not an invitation. It was a trap. Gregory had been circling her for weeks, spreading whispers about her, planting doubts in the minds of colleagues. Tonight, she felt he was ready to strike. Sophie held Angela's hand tightly. The little girl's eyes were wide at the glittering room, but she stayed close, sensing her mother's unease. On the stage, Gregory took the microphone. His voice was smooth, confident, almost charming. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather not only to celebrate generosity, but also to recognize those among us who claim to lead with integrity. His words carried a sharp edge, and his eyes flickered toward Angela. Angela's chest tightened. She braced herself. Gregory clicked a button, and a large screen lit up behind him. Documents and emails flashed on the screen, heavily edited, twisted to make it seem as though Angela had been stealing company funds and using charity resources for personal gain. Gasps filled the room. People turned, their eyes narrowing at Angela. "Here is the truth," Gregory declared. "The woman you trusted has been deceiving us all. She has hidden behind sympathy and soft words, but numbers do not lie." Angela's heart pounded. She knew every document was fake, every word carefully crafted to break her. For a moment, the walls of the room seemed to close in, but then something unexpected happened. Sophie let go of Angela's hand and walked toward the stage. The crowd shifted, murmuring in confusion. A child in the middle of such a powerful gathering was out of place, almost invisible, until Sophie began to speak. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew steady. "You are lying." The room went silent. A child's honesty cut sharper than any accusation. Sophie looked directly at Gregory. "My mother never steals. She works all day and still makes me dinner at night. She tells me to be honest even when it is hard. She tells me to stand tall even when people look down on me. You do not know her, but I do." Her small voice carried through the golden ballroom like a beam of light piercing the dark. People froze. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others looked at Angela with doubt slowly melting into curiosity. Angela's throat tightened, tears threatened to fall, but she stood tall. Then, William rose from his chair. For years, people whispered that the old man never took sides, never showed emotion. But tonight, something had shifted. He looked at Gregory, then at Angela, and finally at Sophie. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "I have watched Angela," William said slowly. "I have seen how she treats people, not with power, but with dignity. And I have seen how this child looks at her. A child's truth carries no agenda. Tonight I choose to believe her over your staged evidence." Gasps spread across the room again, but this time for a different reason. Gregory's face stiffened, his mask of confidence slipping. "You cannot take the word of a child," he snapped. But before he could continue, another voice joined. A firm, steady voice from the back of the hall. David Collins stepped forward, holding a folder in his hand. "I think it is time the real truth comes out." All eyes turned to him. People recognized his name. A man once tied to federal investigations. Someone who carried weight and credibility. David walked calmly to the front, his shoes clicking against the marble. He opened the folder and held up his own stack of documents. I have spent the last few weeks reviewing company accounts. What Gregory presented tonight is a forgery. The real numbers tell a different story, one that points directly to Gregory himself. Large transfers, hidden accounts, and suspicious contracts. A murmur grew into a wave of shock across the ballroom. Gregory's confidence collapsed. His face flushed red as people whispered and pointed. Angela felt the heavy air around her finally lift. Sophie ran back to her and clutched her tightly, burying her face in Angela's dress. David looked directly at Gregory. You tried to bury an innocent woman, but in doing so, you exposed your own corruption. The board members in the room began to rise, their expressions stern. William, still standing, looked around the room and said firmly, Tonight we saw courage from where we least expected it, from a child. We also saw the cruelty of lies. I will not allow this company to be ruled by deceit any longer. Angela closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of months of fear finally break. She was not just fighting alone anymore. Sophie's courage, William's voice, and David's truth had turned the tide. For the first time, Angela stood tall, not as a victim, but as someone vindicated. And yet, deep down, she knew this was not the end. Gregory would not give up easily. But tonight, in this golden room filled with power and shadows, she had won back her voice. The silence that followed David's revelations at the gala did not last long. The evidence against Gregory was undeniable. His face turned pale as whispers filled the hall. Board members who had once followed his every word now looked away, unwilling to be tied to his disgrace. William rose from his seat, his voice carrying strength that silenced the murmurs. Gregory Barnes has betrayed not only me, but this entire company. He used lies to destroy those who were loyal, while he himself was guilty of corruption. He will answer for this. 2 security officers, already called in by David, moved forward. Gregory tried to protest, but the weight of proof crushed his voice. Within minutes, he was escorted out of the hall, his once proud walk replaced by the shuffle of defeat. Angela stood frozen. For months she had carried the shame of whispered rumors, the sting of insults, and the fear of losing everything she had worked for. Now, in one single night, her honor was restored. William turned to her, his expression softer now. Angela, he said, I misjudged you. You carried yourself with dignity even when the world turned against you. That is true strength. Tears welled in Angela's eyes, but she held them back, standing tall. I only did what I believed was right, sir, she replied quietly. Before she could say more, Sophie tugged at her sleeve. The little girl's eyes shone with pride. She looked up at William with a voice still small, but steady. Mr. William, my mom is the bravest person I know. She never gave up. The room softened at those words. A child's truth had cut through, the noise in a way no lawyer or businessman could. People clapped, not for the downfall of Gregory, but for the courage of Angela and Sophie. William knelt slightly so he was eye level with Sophie. And you, young lady, are braver than most adults I know. Never forget that. The applause grew, filling the room with warmth. For the first time in months, Angela felt seen, not as a target of gossip, but as a woman who had endured and triumphed. In the days that followed, William not only cleared Angela's name, but also elevated her position. He placed her in charge of a new department that carried his trust. Her voice, once silenced by fear, was now respected by the very people who had doubted her. Sophie, too, became a quiet symbol of courage. Her innocence reminded everyone that truth, no matter how small, had the power to bring light into darkness. Gregory's fall was swift. Arrested for fraud and embezzlement, he became the cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Meanwhile, Angela transformed from a victim of schemes into a respected figure in William's circle, a woman who had not only survived but risen stronger. And as Angela watched Sophie laugh freely once again, she knew the pain of the past had carved a new path, a future built on justice, recognition, and dignity. The boardroom had emptied, yet a calm stillness lingered. Angela gathered her files with trembling hands, still processing the whirlwind of betrayal, humiliation, and vindication she had lived through in just one evening. Sophie clutched her mother's hand, her wide eyes filled not with fear, but with pride. William approached quietly, his usual commanding presence softened. He placed a reassuring hand on Angela's shoulder. "You fought with dignity," he said warmly, "and you protected what mattered most, your child." Angela's eyes welled. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as an employee, not as a target of cruelty, but as a mother and a woman of integrity. Then William bent down to Sophie's level. "And you, young lady," he smiled, "you reminded all of us tonight what courage looks like." Sophie hesitated, then whispered something that hushed even the air around them. "Good people protect each other. Bad people only protect themselves." Her words, pure and unpolished, struck deeper than any speech could. Angela gasped softly, and William's eyes glistened. Later that week, Angela received news that left her speechless. William had established the Sophie Grant Scholarship Fund, dedicated to helping children of single mothers pursue education. It was his silent way of ensuring Sophie's courage lived on, transforming one little girl's moment of bravery into a legacy of hope. And for Angela, it was the final proof. Dignity may bend under cruelty, but it never breaks.